I never imagined that living in a neighborhood of two-story colonials, each set roughly 30 feet apart, could feel like occupying a forward position in a low-grade war. From the outside, our cul-de-sac looks picture-perfect: freshly painted front doors, sidewalks edged with 18-inch ornamental shrubs, and mailboxes aligned to within a quarter-inch of uniformity. But beneath the veneer of suburban tranquility lies a battleground defined by petty rivalries, whispered resentments, and the ever-watchful eye of the HOA. It all began the day I received my first HOA violation notice. I'd spent my Saturday morning mowing the lawn, blades cut to exactly 4 inches, per the community handbook, and yet someone had reported a single tuft of grass that dared to breach regulation. The notice, printed on glossy white cardstock, cited excessive turf height and demanded compliance within 48 hours or face a fine of up to $100. Standing on my driveway, I felt the first stirrings of indignation. Who among us hadn't driven past a yard with a cracked driveway or a mailbox slanted at an odd angle? That same afternoon, I met Karen. She lives 2 doors down, in a house distinguished only by a navy blue door that the HOA approved last spring. Karen introduced herself over the fence, arms crossed, her tone polite but clipped. She asked if I'd noticed the slight tilt in her recycling bin, which, she claimed, had somehow migrated onto my property line. Before I could answer, she'd already snapped a photo of the bin's position and informed me she would forward it to the HOA board. I forced a smile, thanked her for her vigilance, and retreated into the house, mentally bracing myself for the next skirmish. Over the following weeks, Karen's complaints became a litany of minor grievances: the angle of my outdoor lighting, the volume of my late-night playlist, even the angle at which I hung holiday decorations. Each morning brought a fresh notice slipped under my door, stamped with the HOA logo and signed by Neighborhood Compliance Committee. With every citation, I felt less like a homeowner and more like a trespasser in my own yard. Yet, for all the frustration, there was something almost exhilarating about the absurdity of it all. This wasn't a war for territory or power, it was a contest of wills fought over the height of hedges and the shade of shutters. And at its center stood Karen, self-appointed guardian of every rule, armed with a clipboard and a camera phone. Against her meticulous record-keeping, I found myself plotting small rebellions: a forgotten garden gnome here, a subtly shifted flower pot there. In that moment, I realized that suburban life, with its neat rows of houses and well-tended lawns, can be as charged as any battlefield. The difference is that our weapons are petty: a strategically placed lawn ornament, a carefully worded email, a security camera pointed just so. And while the HOA holds the ultimate authority, dispensing fines and warnings with robotic impartiality, Karen is the one who pulls the trigger. So here I stand, at the very start of this tale, heart pounding with anticipation. What began as a single notice about my grass has evolved into a full-blown campaign of one-upmanship. And in the opening salvos of this suburban skirmish, it's clear that neither Karen nor I are willing to back down. The real question is, how far will we go before one of us concedes defeat? From the moment I first drove into this neighborhood, the sheer tidiness of every property was almost unsettling. Perfection seemed practically mandatory. Houses boasted matching flower beds, evenly trimmed hedges, and shutters all painted in an identical shade of eggshell blue. Even the resident pets, or so I imagined, felt the unspoken command to maintain absolute silence after 9 p.m. At the center of all this conformity loomed the HOA, a powerful entity that acted less like a helpful community council and more like a squad of vigilant enforcers. Their reach extended into the most trivial aspects of daily life: the exact height of your backyard grass, the color of the bulbs illuminating your porch, and even how far your mailbox protruded from the curb. I learned quickly that any deviation from the norm risked punishment in the form of fines and warning letters slipped under one's door at odd hours. The offenses could be laughably small, like a single weed poking through a driveway crack, but the consequences were real. One neighbor confided in me that she'd once been penalized for leaving her trash bin on the curb for a single extra day because she had come down with the flu. The HOA's stance was unwavering: rules were rules, no matter how inconvenient or unreasonable they seemed. Yet, in a strange way, this rigorous attention to detail also gave the community a veneer of impeccable order. Streets remained clean, lawns stayed tidy, and property values rarely dipped. People who thrived on routine found comfort here. They believed the HOA guarded their investments and preserved the neighborhood's picture-perfect appeal. But for independent spirits like me, it felt suffocating. Every choice, from the color of my outdoor wreath to the placement of my recycling container, seemed subject to scrutiny. Karen, of course, thrived in this rigid environment. She took it upon herself to patrol the sidewalks each morning, armed with her phone's camera, ready to document any infraction she could find. Though no one officially appointed her, she became the de facto eyes and ears of the HOA. If a resident's fence leaned slightly at the corner, Karen noticed. If a teenager forgot to bring in the trash bin on schedule, she reported it. And if, by chance, the paint on your mailbox looked even a shade lighter than the approved color, expect a formal complaint by noon. To her credit, Karen wasn't entirely disliked. Some neighbors appreciated her thoroughness, at least, those who valued neatness above all else. They'd invite her over for tea, praising her dedication to maintaining the area's prestige. Others, however, whispered behind closed doors that she simply enjoyed wielding what little power she had. After all, compliance with the HOA guaranteed a certain sense of status, and Karen made sure everyone knew she was its staunchest ally. Living under such scrutiny took a toll on me. I found myself double-checking trivial tasks, ensuring my lawn was trimmed to exactly 4 inches, aligning the garbage can at the perfect angle, and repainting my shutters the moment they showed the faintest sign of fading. The community might have looked serene, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. And in this pressure cooker of perfection, it was only a matter of time before one small act, one petty oversight, ignited a far larger conflict. If the HOA was the muscle that kept the neighborhood in line, Karen was its most fervent disciple. Day by day, I witnessed her unrelenting dedication to upholding rules that most of us found excessive. She had an uncanny knack for spotting what others overlooked, a decorative flower pot that was 2 inches too tall or an outdoor light bulb that cast an unapproved hue after dusk. Where I saw minor oversights or harmless eccentricities, Karen saw potential hazards to the community's sense of uniformity. What made Karen's behavior even more striking was the sense of entitlement that underpinned everything she did. When she didn't approve of something, her complaints sounded less like concerns and more like royal decrees. She once confronted me over the unruly state of my hedge, which, in truth, only needed a trim around the edges. Her tone implied that my negligence was personally offensive to her, as though a slightly shaggy hedge had ruined the entire look of the street. Music was another perennial issue. I've always enjoyed playing my favorite tunes on the weekends, never at an outrageous volume, mind you, but loud enough to keep me company while I tinkered around the garage. That routine ended the moment Karen moved in. She started by politely asking me to lower the volume, citing noise regulations posted by the HOA. But when I complied and still received a written warning, I realized that polite was just her opening move in a strategy to shut down any sound she deemed bothersome. Her attention to detail extended to every aspect of my routine. If my recycling bin was out a moment too soon or returned a moment too late, she'd document it. Photos would be emailed to the HOA board, often accompanied by lengthy descriptions of my alleged offenses. Once, I overheard her bragging to another neighbor about how she was saving the block from chaos by reporting every minor misstep. At first, I tried my best to accommodate her demands. I trimmed my hedge more often than I ever had before, practically measured the volume of my music in decibels, and even set phone reminders so I wouldn't forget to pull the recycling bin in on time. But it was impossible to keep pace with her ever-growing list of grievances. The more concessions I made, the more empowered she seemed to become. What really struck me was how Karen's sense of privilege colored her every interaction. She didn't merely ask for compliance, she expected it as her due. The HOA, in turn, seemed to encourage her vigilance, giving her a ready platform to submit complaint after complaint. Over time, her watchful presence shifted from an annoyance to something more pervasive, an inescapable force intruding upon my privacy. Little did I know, Karen's habitual meddling was just the tip of the iceberg. Her most audacious move was yet to come, and it would involve something far more significant than a neglected hedge or a misplaced recycling bin. It began on a muggy summer evening. I'd stepped outside to water the row of hydrangeas by my front porch, a routine I found oddly therapeutic in this neighborhood of perpetual watchfulness. The cicadas hummed in the trees, and the sun was just dipping below the horizon. Typically, I would have hurried back indoors to avoid any stray conversation with Karen, but something caught my eye in the dim light, an extension cord snaking along the side of my house. At first, I assumed I'd been careless and left one of my own cords out. But then I noticed that it was plugged into an outdoor power outlet near my garage door, one I rarely used, and extended across my lawn toward Karen's property. My immediate reaction was disbelief. Who would take the liberty to run a cable from my external socket all the way to their yard? Curiosity propelled me forward. I followed the bright orange line as it skirted the edge of my lawn, careful not to rustle the bushes and draw attention. The cord slipped under the fence that separated my lot from Karen's. Even in the failing light, I could see exactly where it led, right up to her driveway, connecting to a sleek, unfamiliar electric car parked outside. I stood there, half hidden by the fence, as realization sank in. Karen had acquired a brand new Ion Spark, a high-end electric vehicle with the distinctive arching headlights that signaled top-of-the-line technology. Yet, evidently, she either didn't have or chose not to use her own charging setup. Instead, she'd decided to commandeer mine. The sheer audacity left me momentarily speechless. She hadn't even bothered to ask permission. It was as though she believed my property was fair game, just another resource she could tap into to maintain her pristine, eco-friendly image. Anger started to bubble within me, but a strange calm followed. I needed proof, something beyond my own word that Karen was stealing my electricity. Later that evening, I returned to my house and fished out my old security camera. Initially, I'd installed it to keep an eye on porch deliveries, but the batteries had long since died. With renewed purpose, I charged it up, positioned it near the window facing that seldom-used outlet, and adjusted its night vision settings. I felt a surge of adrenaline, as though I were setting a trap. Over the next few days, I avoided direct confrontation. Instead, I observed. At around midnight, Karen would sneak over, unplug the Ion Spark from her side of the fence, then carefully coil the extension cord before sunrise. Had I not been paying attention, I might never have known. My electrical bill would simply have climbed, and I'd be left guessing why. But now, with clear footage from my reactivated camera, I had undeniable evidence. Karen was systematically siphoning power for her personal gain. I wrestled with how to respond. A part of me wanted to storm over to her house in the middle of the night, yank out the plug, and demand an explanation. But after considering how she behaved over minor issues, like the hedge, the music, and the recycling bin, I realized that a direct confrontation might only escalate matters. She'd twist the narrative in her favor, or maybe even report me to the HOA for harassment. Instead, I decided to keep quiet while I weighed my options. My discovery of her covert charging sessions felt like a chess move. She'd made a brazen opening, and now the board was mine to play. I could file a complaint with the HOA, but Karen likely had the board wrapped around her little finger, given how meticulously she contributed to their enforcement. I could approach the utility company about the theft, but that might spiral into a bureaucratic mess. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a simmering sense of indignation, fueled by all her earlier meddling. This was no longer just about stolen electricity. It was about principle, and, if I was honest with myself, about the satisfaction of exposing Karen's hypocrisy. She, who held herself up as the paragon of rule-abiding citizenship, was secretly breaching the most basic standards of respect for another's property. Some might argue I should have called her out directly or sought a civilized discussion. But this wasn't an isolated incident, it was the culmination of a long string of power plays on her part. She'd used the HOA's rules like weapons against me and other neighbors. Now, she was blatantly disregarding not just neighborhood guidelines but basic moral decency. So I decided to craft a plan, one that would let me respond in kind, on my terms, without inviting immediate backlash. After all, Karen had stepped into my territory, literally and figuratively. If she wanted a war of petty infractions and covert acts, then war was what she'd get. And to my mind, this ion spark theft was the perfect catalyst for the next phase of our deepening conflict. My decision to engineer a form of calculated revenge sprang directly from Karen's blatant disregard for boundaries. Had she simply asked if she could borrow my external outlet until she installed her own charging station, I might have been open to a neighborly favor. But sneaking onto my property under the cover of darkness and appropriating my electricity? That was a different story entirely. The seed of the idea formed late one night as I replayed the security footage. There was Karen, hoodie pulled low over her face, though her distinctive posture gave her away, plugging her ion spark cable into my outlet. She had the slyness of someone who believed they'd never get caught. I realized she must have reasoned that if I ever noticed a spike in my electricity costs, I'd chalk it up to summer air conditioning or a faulty appliance. Perhaps she thought I was too preoccupied with the HOA's constant citations to notice. But notice I did. And so, out of a sense of both self-preservation and a burgeoning mischievous streak, I began researching methods to disrupt the charging process without causing permanent damage. I didn't want to total her ion spark, that would trigger legal ramifications and escalate beyond petty revenge. Instead, I looked into ways to deliver a short, contained power surge, enough to trip sensors and cause her system to shut down, but not enough to fry major components. For the next few days, my home office turned into a makeshift electronics lab. I combed through online forums where EV owners discussed the intricacies of charging adapters and surge protectors. I studied how electric cars monitor voltage and amperage, how they respond to fluctuations, and what safety measures are built into most charging cables. The deeper I went, the more I marveled at how meticulously these systems are designed to defend against common electrical hiccups. Yet even the best systems can't account for every scenario. With the right equipment, an unexpected voltage spike could mimic a grid malfunction. The car would detect the anomaly and lock down charging to protect itself. Once triggered, it might take some time, and potentially a service call to the dealership, before the ion spark would accept a new charge. Perfect, I thought, as I jotted down the final steps in my notebook. Next, I had to adapt my external outlet. The real challenge lay in making sure the surge wouldn't backfire into my own house or trip my entire electrical panel. If I took out my own fridge or air conditioner, I'd only be punishing myself. After scouring a local hardware store for components, I set up an isolated circuit with specialized fuses and a rudimentary surge generator. It wouldn't be enough to spark a fire or cause lasting harm, just a short jolt to confuse the car's charging port. The hardest part of this plan wasn't the electrical work but rather keeping my cool around Karen. She continued her daily patrols, her phone camera at the ready, as though the world was her personal training ground for the next big HOA crackdown. Each time we crossed paths, I flashed her a polite smile and even offered a friendly wave. It was a delicate balancing act, show no hint of suspicion while quietly rigging my outlet to deliver a jolt strong enough to rattle her ion spark's electronics. On the night before I planned to execute my scheme, I did a test run using a spare extension cable and an old lamp. The lamp flickered violently for a split second before its bulb popped. The circuit breaker in my newly installed device tripped immediately afterward, just as I'd hoped. The test suggested that the ion spark's advanced protective features would sense this surge as a major fault and shut down the vehicle's charging capabilities. With the setup now verified, I waited. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the entire neighborhood sensed something monumental was about to happen. Karen was bound to come skulking across my lawn sooner or later. In the meantime, I double-checked every connection, every fuse, and every safety measure. I didn't want real damage, just a symbolic strike that would leave her flustered, inconvenienced, and, most importantly, exposed as a thief. Ultimately, this wasn't just about electric bills or stolen power. It was about standing up to someone who had made it her mission to micromanage and control those around her. For too long, Karen had wielded the HOA rulebook like a hammer, pounding on anyone who dared step out of line. Now, she was about to learn that even the most diligent enforcer of petty ordinances could fall victim to a more cunning adversary. I won't pretend there wasn't a certain glee in planning out this sabotage. It wasn't my proudest moment, but it felt like a natural response to her ongoing campaign of intimidation. Sometimes, in the face of persistent bullying, the only recourse is a well-orchestrated act of resistance, even if it's tinged with a touch of pettiness. After all, I hadn't started this suburban Cold War, but I was certainly prepared to fight back. The appointed night arrived with a surprising calm. The cicadas buzzed, and a warm breeze rustled the leaves in the trees above. I sat in my living room, lights dimmed, watching the monitor that displayed my security camera feed. The external outlet was just within view, illuminated by a small motion-activated light I'd installed to capture Karen's nocturnal visits. I had no idea when she would come, only that she was bound to do so eventually. My heart pounded with every flicker of movement on the screen. A stray cat padded by, briefly triggering the light. My pulse quickened, but I recognized the feline silhouette and relaxed again. Minutes stretched into an hour, and I started to wonder if Karen had decided to skip her nightly theft. Then, at about 12:45 a.m., the faintest ripple of motion caught my eye. The security light snapped on, revealing Karen crouching beside the fence. She was dressed entirely in black athletic wear, a stark contrast to the preppy clothes she often wore during her daily rounds. Clutched in her hand was the ion spark charging cable. Moving slowly, she fed the cable through a gap in the fence toward my external outlet. My trap was set. The specialized device I'd installed was primed to deliver a momentary surge once the ion spark drew power. I clutched the arm of my sofa, the tension in my muscles so tight it felt like I might snap. Would everything work as planned, or had I overlooked some detail that would end up short-circuiting my entire house? Karen plugged in the cable with a practiced motion, as though she'd done it dozens of times before. She gave a quick glance around, likely ensuring no one was watching, then rose to her feet. The security light, sensing no further movement, flicked off a few seconds later, plunging the yard into darkness once more. I exhaled, my breath trembling. For a moment, nothing happened. The ion spark's charging status indicator, a sleek band of LEDs along the vehicle's hood, remained dark on my monitor. Then, in a flash, the band lit up. That was my signal. The device I'd wired into the outlet detected the power draw and sprang into action. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could sense a jolt. The ion spark's lights flickered wildly for a split second before cutting off. In the same instant, my specialized circuit breaker tripped, preventing any lasting harm to my own electrical system. Karen, still lurking near the fence, must have noticed the sudden malfunction because she rushed over to check the cable. A minute later, she unplugged it, inspecting the connector under the pale glow of her phone. I stifled a triumphant laugh. The entire event had lasted less than 2 minutes, but its impact would be far more enduring. If my calculations were correct, Karen's ion spark would interpret the surge as a critical fault. She might need a dealer reset or at least some diagnostic process before the car would charge normally again. My plan had worked, no permanent damage to either property, just a potent jolt of inconvenience. I waited another hour, monitoring the feed to see if Karen would try again, but she soon retreated indoors. The yard remained quiet and empty. I finally allowed myself to exhale fully, adrenaline still pulsing through my veins. With the night's operation complete, I powered down the monitor and tried to sleep. My mind raced, replaying the moment the ion spark's light spasmed in confusion. I felt a slight pang of guilt for resorting to sabotage, but that emotion was swiftly drowned out by a sense of vindication. Karen had intruded on my property and stolen my electricity. What I'd done was simply level the playing field. The next morning, I conducted my usual routine. I stepped outside to collect the newspaper and couldn't help but glance over at Karen's driveway. The Ion Spark sat there, looking as sleek as ever, but if my plan had been successful, it was now nothing more than an expensive, temporarily disabled hunk of metal. I spotted Karen skulking around the car, phone in hand, a deep scowl twisting her features. From a distance, I watched as she got into the driver's seat and attempted to start the ignition. Though I couldn't hear the specifics, I recognized the telltale signs of frustration. Abrupt head movements, repeated attempts at fiddling with the dashboard, and the pointed jabbing of her phone screen, likely calling tech support or the dealership. In that moment, I forced myself to maintain a neutral expression. The last thing I needed was for her to sense my satisfaction or to suspect my involvement. So I feigned ignorance, offering her a wave if she happened to glance my way. Inside, though, I was practically buzzing with schadenfreude. After enduring her endless complaints and covert electricity theft, I finally had my turn at retribution. Little did Karen know, this was just the beginning. Her Ion Spark might be out of commission for a day or two, but I sensed the fallout from this minor fault would stretch far beyond the inconvenience of scheduling a repair. Knowing her penchant for drama and finger-pointing, I fully expected her to claim sabotage, though proving it would be another matter entirely. For now, I savored my small victory, keenly aware that in the unspoken suburban war we'd been waging, I had just landed a decisive blow. The morning after the surge was a spectacle of confusion and panic, on Karen's part, at least. By the time I headed out for my usual pre-work jog, she was standing by her Ion Spark, phone pressed against her ear, her face a portrait of disbelief. Even from across the street, I could hear the muffled edge of her voice, thick with frustration. I gathered she was in an extended debate with customer service or possibly the local dealership, pleading for a quick fix. I pretended not to notice her agitation as I passed by, headphones in, giving her only the briefest nod. She didn't bother returning the greeting. Her energies were singularly focused on diagnosing why her state-of-the-art electric car refused to charge. Part of me wondered if she suspected my involvement. Surely, she had to consider the possibility that I might retaliate for her theft of my electricity. But given how brazenly she'd been poaching power, perhaps it never crossed her mind that I had the technical know-how or the nerve to strike back. Throughout that day, whenever I peeked out the window, I glimpsed Karen in various stages of distress. She paced her driveway, phone in hand, or hovered near the Ion Spark's charging port, as though willing it to function. By late afternoon, she started physically pushing the car a few feet to align it better with the cable, but nothing changed. The car simply wouldn't accept a charge. It was a bizarre sight, Karen, who normally carried herself with such haughty composure, reduced to manually maneuvering her prized electric vehicle in a futile effort to restore power. As evening approached, she finally gave up. The Ion Spark sat dormant, a silent testament to my late-night handiwork. I half expected Karen to come banging on my door with accusations, but she never did. Instead, she retreated indoors. Perhaps she felt too embarrassed to reveal she'd been siphoning electricity, or maybe she was too flustered to piece together the cause of the fault. From my vantage point, I watched it all with restrained glee. This was the outcome I'd wanted, a swift, non-destructive lesson in humility. Yet, as the day wore on, a subtle shift took place in my mind. Part of me felt a pang of empathy. I hated that part, hated that I could feel the slightest bit bad for Karen, given how she treated me. But as she scurried back and forth, phone calls multiplying by the hour, I recognized genuine desperation in her eyes. Then again, had she shown me or any of our neighbors an ounce of understanding? She'd reported me to the HOA over trivial nonsense, made scenes about my music, my hedge, my trash bin, and so much more. Her entire modus operandi was to impose her will, no matter how petty the infraction. If nothing else, this predicament might teach her that actions have consequences. The next morning, I spotted a tow truck pulling up to her driveway. The Ion Spark was rolled onto the flatbed, bound for a service center or dealership. Karen trailed behind, looking as though she'd been personally slighted by the universe. As the truck rumbled away, the expression on her face was a mixture of indignation and anxiety, like she was torn between wanting to call the cops on me for imaginary crimes and acknowledging the humiliating reality of her situation. Over the next several days, Karen's normal routine unraveled. Without her prized electric car, she resorted to walking or catching rides from friends whenever she could. On the rare occasions she left the house in her old coupe, an aging vehicle that belched gray smoke from its tailpipe. She seemed almost ashamed, as if driving something so visibly imperfect sullied her image as the reigning queen of neighborhood standards. Meanwhile, I went about my life with a renewed sense of calm. No more cryptic notes about my lawn or my music volume appeared. The HOA, for once, seemed quiet. Karen's attention was wholly diverted to her ion spark troubles. Word around the community was that she had lodged multiple complaints with the manufacturer, claiming the charging system was defective from the start. Some neighbors, ordinarily sympathetic to Karen's crusade for suburban perfection, muttered that it served her right for flaunting a fancy new vehicle. Strangely enough, I couldn't help but wonder what might happen if Karen discovered the truth, that her predicament wasn't some random technical glitch but a calculated retaliation for her rampant meddling. Would she escalate her campaign against me? Or would she retreat, knowing she had finally met a neighbor capable of outmaneuvering her? In quieter moments, I wrestled with an inner conflict. Yes, I'd taught her a lesson, but had I stooped to her level in the process? Petty revenge can be addictive, a quick fix that offers immediate satisfaction yet often leads to a cycle of ever-increasing hostility. Then again, how else do you stand up to a serial busybody who seizes every opportunity to weaponize the HOA's rules? For now, I chose to relish the respite. Karen's meltdown over her ion spark's inexplicable failure had, at least temporarily, freed me from her scrutiny. I could mow my lawn without fear of a measuring stick appearing over the fence. I could set out my recycling bin without worrying about a staged photo landing in the HOA's inbox. It was as though the neighborhood had breathed a collective sigh of relief, if only for a little while. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen was the type to bounce back, more determined than ever to regain her stature as the HOA's most vigilant enforcer. The seeds of our suburban Cold War had only just begun to sprout, and I suspected that, once her ion spark was operational again, she'd be itching for retaliation. Little did I realize how soon her counterattack would come, and how far she'd be willing to go to reclaim her sense of power. The repercussions of Karen's misfortune echoed through the neighborhood for a couple of weeks. With her ion spark stuck in the shop, she resorted to her backup vehicle, a hulking Roadmaster SUV that guzzled fuel like it was going out of style. It was comically incongruous, this woman who prided herself on policing recycling bins and lawn chemicals now driving a monster of a vehicle that roared to life every morning, belching plumes of exhaust. At first, I savored the irony. She'd paraded her electric car around as if it were a badge of eco-conscious superiority, and now she was stuck with a gas-burning relic. But Karen's capacity for denial was impressive. She complained loudly to anyone who would listen that the ion spark manufacturer was at fault, that she'd been sold a lemon, and that the dealership was conspiring against her. When pressed for details, she offered evasive half-truths, never once admitting she'd been siphoning electricity from my outlet. Her frustration soon spilled over into wild accusations. She pointed fingers not just at the dealership but also at the local power company, claiming sabotage. According to the rumor mill, she even suggested that voltage fluctuations in our area caused the ion spark's catastrophic failure. Some neighbors seemed skeptical, but others, who once lauded Karen as the guardian of community standards, nodded sympathetically. Meanwhile, I played my part as the concerned neighbor. Whenever Karen lamented her predicament within earshot, I offered polite expressions of support, even going so far as to say how unfortunate it was that the utility grid let her down at such a critical time. Inside, of course, I was brimming with satisfaction. The comedic element of Karen huffing around in a gas guzzler she clearly despised was almost too good to be true. Her meltdown continued behind the scenes. One evening, I saw her scrawling notes on a clipboard while inspecting her power meter, as though she were gathering evidence for a grand conspiracy. Another day, I found a flyer in my mailbox, Karen urging neighbors to sign a petition demanding the HOA investigate possible electrical anomalies in the community. The hypocrisy of someone who'd been stealing electricity now championing an inquiry into power issues was downright theatrical. Still, I was careful not to gloat openly. I sensed Karen's fury simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for an excuse to lash out. My short-term victory was sweet, but I also knew she was someone who thrived on retribution. If I gave her a hint that I'd orchestrated the Ion Spark's downfall, she'd double her efforts to retaliate. So, I maintained my poker face, nodding sympathetically when she talked about the inconvenience of her roadmaster, her deep suspicion of the power grid, and her determination to file formal complaints. Little did she know, my quiet compliance was part of the game. After all, in a neighborhood where the smallest details mattered, staying one step ahead of Karen meant hiding in plain sight. My truce with Karen, tenuous as it was, came to an abrupt end one muggy afternoon when I discovered an official-looking envelope tucked under my door. The HOA's logo was emblazoned on the front, and my stomach sank at the sight of it. Upon opening it, I learned that my external outlet, the very same one Karen had exploited, had been declared a violation of community safety codes. I read the letter twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. According to the notice, the placement of my outlet posed a potential hazard and needed immediate remediation. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity. This outlet had been installed by a licensed electrician years ago, fully compliant with local regulations. But here it was, labeled a danger by the HOA's so-called compliance committee. Immediately, I suspected Karen's hand in this. She must have pulled strings or leveraged her reputation as the neighborhood busybody to convince the board that my outlet was some kind of public menace. The irony didn't escape me, she had used that very outlet to pilfer electricity, and now she was twisting the rules to penalize me for having it there at all. Rather than confront me directly, Karen had weaponized the HOA's labyrinthine rulebook once again. Her message was clear. If she had to suffer the indignity of driving a gas guzzler, then I would suffer the hassle of an enforced repair. The notice demanded that I relocate the outlet to a spot that met the HOA's newly updated guidelines I suspected had been quietly revised to target me. Determined not to let her see me flinch, I followed the instructions to the letter. I hired the same electrician to relocate the outlet, only this time, I placed it in an even more conspicuous position at the front of my garage. If the HOA was going to force me to move it, I'd make sure everyone could see it. In a stroke of playful defiance, I even added a little sign next to the outlet that read, "Certified Compliant." The move, of course, cost me both time and money. But I refused to give Karen the satisfaction of watching me squirm. Instead, I snapped a few photos of the finished work and sent them to the HOA's compliance committee, CCNG Karen in the email. My tone was brisk but polite, thanking them for their diligence and assuring them that I valued the safety of the community. Beneath my outward composure, though, a fierce anger simmered. Karen had struck back with the same petty gusto I'd come to expect from her. She thought she'd found my Achilles heel. But in truth, all she'd done was fuel my resolve to stand my ground. If she believed this was over, that forcing me to relocate my outlet would break my spirit, then she clearly hadn't learned a thing. In this never-ending suburban skirmish, we'd each landed blows. Now it was time for the final round, and I had every intention of emerging the victor. Relocating my external outlet was, in the grand scheme of things, a minor inconvenience. But it served as a potent reminder that Karen and I were locked in a battle of wills, and neither of us was prepared to call a truce. With each new development, my sabotage of her Ion Spark, her successful campaign to have my outlet moved. The stakes had inched higher. Yet, standing there on my driveway, examining my newly repositioned, fully certified outlet, I felt an unmistakable sense of satisfaction. I had complied with the HOA's demands to the letter, depriving Karen of the chance to levy more fines or penalties. Moreover, In making the outlet even more visible, I'd turn the tables on her tactic. Should she ever feel the urge to siphon electricity again, she'd have no place to hide. I knew this wouldn't be the last move in our ongoing feud. Karen was too prideful to let a blow like the Ion Spark fiasco go unanswered for long. She'd be back, armed with fresh grievances or newly invented violations. But for the moment, I reveled in my small triumph. Each time I walked past that outlet, I saw not a surrender, but a trophy, proof that I had adapted and refused to be intimidated. A few days later, I overheard Karen telling another neighbor she was contemplating further action against those who refused to uphold community standards. She never mentioned my name directly, but I caught her glancing my way, eyes narrowed in thinly veiled hostility. I simply smiled in return, a gesture equal parts politeness and challenge. In quiet moments, I reflected on how absurd this suburban war had become. We were two adults battling over lawn heights, noise levels, and the location of a power outlet. Yet beneath those surface trivialities lay the real conflict: control. Karen wanted to dictate how everyone lived, and I refused to yield to her tyranny. With the Ion Spark still in the shop, or possibly replaced by now, Karen had returned to prowling the sidewalks with her notepad. But a new wariness had crept into her demeanor. She no longer seemed invincible, no longer the unassailable arbiter of the HOA's codes. My surge device had proven that even she could be outmaneuvered. As I watched her pass by my driveway one afternoon, meticulously studying a patch of crabgrass in another neighbor's yard, I felt an odd mixture of annoyance and amusement. Our suburban battlefield would remain as neatly manicured as ever, yet the real power plays happened in stolen moments: a concealed camera, a strategic email, or a carefully rigged outlet. The last laugh, for now, belonged to me. Whether Karen realized it or not, she had pushed me into a corner, and I'd emerged with a sharper wit and a determination to guard my home on my own terms. Eventually, she might escalate, or I might hatch another countermeasure. But as long as she insisted on treating our neighborhood like her personal kingdom, she could expect further retaliation. After all, in this carefully curated world of matching shutters and uniform mailboxes, petty revenges had become our most colorful form of expression. And I, for one, was prepared to keep fighting until Karen either relented or found a new target entirely.